Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow, gentle paddle through one of the most brilliant, yet bizarre feats of ancient engineering, the floating gardens of the Aztecs. That's right, entire gardens. Floating. You, in your cozy pajamas, safe. In your bed, are about to imagine standing ankle-deep in mud, surrounded by towering stalks of maize and the faint croak of frogs. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes here without slipping face first into the water. But no worries, tonight you're perfectly dry. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step barefoot onto a spongy platform of woven reeds and mud, surrounded by the shimmering expanse of Lake Texcoco. The early morning mist still clings to the water's surface, curling around your ankles as you walk. All around you are rows upon rows of floating islands, Chinampas, as the locals call them, stretching as far as the eye can see. The air is thick with the earthy scent of wet soil, mingled with the faint sweetness of blooming marigolds. It's hard to believe, but this entire area was once open water. Imagine, no cozy patches of squash and beans, no neat rows of amaranth, just birds, skimming the waves and fishermen in narrow canoes. But necessity, as usual, bred creativity. The Aztecs needed farmland, but they also chose to build their city, Tenochtitlan, right in the middle of a lake. Not the most practical location, unless, of course, you're a people stubbornly determined to bend nature to your will, so they did just that. You watch as a group of workers drives long wooden stakes deep into the shallow lake bed, forming rectangular outlines like giant garden boxes. They weave together reeds and branches, layer upon layer, until a floating mat takes shape. Then comes the part that makes your feet squish now. Mud. Sludge from the lake's bottom, rich with nutrients, heaped up to anchor the new island. Over time, these mats become stable enough to stand on, farm, even build small shelters. Historians still debate whether the Aztecs invented this system independently or refined it from techniques used by earlier cultures, like the Exocamilca. Either way, it's a marvel of ingenuity, a testament to how humans will always find a way to grow a tomato, even if they have to do it on a raft. As you walk further, waterfowl scatter into the air with sleepy flaps, their feathers leaving tiny ripples in the water. The lake is calm now, but centuries ago, it wasn't just a peaceful pond, it was a lifeline. By transforming parts of it into these lush, floating gardens, the Aztecs not only fed their growing population, but also created a landscape unlike any other in the ancient world. You pause at the edge of one Chinampa, where corn plants stand taller than you, their green blades slicing gently through the morning air. Below your feet, wooden pilings, now hidden beneath layers of soil, anchor the island securely to the lake bed. Without them, all this might simply drift away on the next strong breeze, sort of like your motivation every Monday morning. The wind picks up, sending little shivers across the water's surface. Somewhere nearby, a canoe creaks as it's untied, ready to glide silently between the channels. You realize that these aren't just isolated patches of land, they're part of a vast, interconnected network. Narrow waterways crisscross the landscape, allowing farmers easy access to their plots and turning what could have been a logistical nightmare into a surprisingly elegant solution. There's something almost meditative about it, the gentle sway of the plants, the rhythmic creak of paddles in the distance, the soft cooing of doves nesting in nearby willow trees. You take a deep breath, letting the damp, earthy air fill your lungs, and then, just as you're marveling at the serenity of it all, you notice something odd. A small figurine tucked into the reeds at the edge of the island. A clay doll, worn, smooth by water and time. Perhaps an offering to Tlaloc, the rain god, or just a child's forgotten toy. Either way, it's a quiet reminder that life here wasn't just about survival, it was about culture, belief, and finding beauty in even the muddiest of places. As you step back onto the canoe, waiting at the shore of the Chinampa, you glance, once more, at the shimmering lake. What once was an obstacle, a barrier of water, has been turned into a gardener, floating testament to human adaptability. And you, lucky dreamer, didn't even have to get your hands dirty. You glide silently across the water, the paddle barely making a sound as it dips into the lake's cool surface. Ahead, you spot a group of farmers at work, their hands deftly weaving together long reeds and willow branches. You draw closer, watching as they methodically drive wooden stakes deep into the lake bed to outline a new Chinampa. It looks almost like the framework for a giant floating raft, but with much more purpose and permanence. One of the farmers, his straw hat stilted just so to shield his eyes from the morning sun, ties together thick bundles of reeds with agave fiber. The others add layers of branches and soil, stacking them carefully. You can smell the earthy aroma of wet reeds mixed with the subtle sharpness of fresh-cut willow, scent as old as the system itself. Building a garden on water may sound like a whimsical Pinterest project, but here, it's all about survival. The Aztecs couldn't just cut down a forest or clear a field. They had to create land from scratch, piecing it together one layer at a time, in a process that was as meditative as it was laborious. You crouch down, running your fingers along the edge of the platform. It feels surprisingly solid, despite the fact that you know it's floating above water. With each added layer of mud and composted vegetation, the Chinampa grows heavier, more anchored. Eventually, roots from willow trees planted at the corners will weave their way deep into the lake bed, further stabilizing the structure. And yes, you heard that right, trees on a floating island. It's the kind of thing that would make modern landscape architects weep with envy. You notice how the farmers angled the islands to maximize sunlight exposure, ensuring that their crops grow straight and strong. The spacing between is just wide enough for a canoe to pass, creating a perfectly gridded network of floating plots and canals. It's like an ancient, organic version of Venice, but with fewer tourists and significantly more corn. Historians still puzzle over exactly how the Aztecs developed such a sophisticated system. Some suggest they refined older techniques from neighboring cultures. Others believe it was a brilliant response to the unique challenges posed by their watery environment. Either way, it stands as a testament to human creativity and resilience. The mud used to build up the Chinampas wasn't just any ordinary dirt. It came from the nutrient-rich bottom of the lake, often combined with decomposed vegetation and even human waste. Yes, that's right, you're essentially standing on ancient compost. It might sound gross, but the result was soil so fertile that it could sustain multiple harvests per year without exhausting the land. You lean over and scoop up a handful of this dark, silty earth. It's cool and dense in your palm, almost velvety to the touch. The farmers here have long known that this mixture is the secret to their abundant harvests. It's also probably why their vegetables taste far better than anything you've ever tried from a supermarket shelf. Nearby, a young boy pushes a canoe loaded with seedlings along a narrow canal, carefully distributing them across the newly constructed Chinampa. Each little plant finds its place in the moist soil, soon to take root and thrive. It's a process so seamless and rhythmic that it feels more like a choreographed dance than farming. You can't help but admire the elegance of it all. No need for complex irrigation systems, no reliance on artificial fertilizers, just an intimate relationship with the lake and its natural cycles. The breeze picks up, rustling the reeds and making the water lap softly against the edges of the islands. A dragonfly hovers near your face for a moment before zipping away, its iridescent wings flashing in the sunlight. It's easy to romanticize all this, the idyllic scenery, the sustainable practices, but make no mistake, building and maintaining Chinampas is hard, physical labor. The wooden stakes must be regularly reinforced, the soil constantly replenished, and the canals dredged to prevent silt buildup. Still, as you watch the farmers laugh quietly amongst themselves while they work, it's clear that there's pride here too. This is their legacy, passed down through generations, connecting them to their ancestors in a way that few modern jobs can match. Off in the distance, you see a cluster of willow trees at the corner of an older Chinampa. Their roots have long since penetrated deep into the lake bed, anchoring the island so securely that it's essentially part of the landscape now. Above, a heron balances gracefully on one leg, eyeing the water below for its next meal. You sit back in your canoe, letting it drift slowly along the canal. The soft creak of the wooden frame and the gentle slosh of water against the reeds create a natural lullaby. For a moment, you close your eyes, imagining what it must have felt like centuries ago, when Tenochtitlan was at its peak, a city surrounded by thousands of these floating gardens, feeding a bustling metropolis. And just when you think you've soaked in all there is to see, you notice a small shrine tucked into a corner of one Chinampa. It's simple, a few stones stacked together with a clay figure placed carefully in the center. A quiet tribute, perhaps, to the spirits of the water and earth that made all this possible. You wonder, as historians, whether these gardens were seen solely as agricultural feats, or if they also held spiritual significance. Was each Chinampa a sacred space, a microcosm of the world itself? Scholars continue to debate this, but standing here now, with the scent of damp earth and the sounds of nature all around, it feels like the answer is both. You wake early the next morning, or maybe you never really slept, lulled by the quiet sounds of water lapping against the Chinampa's edges. Today, you get a little messier. You press your bare foot into the dark, spongy soil, feeling it give. Slightly beneath your weight, soft, cool, and impossibly rich. This, you realize, is the secret ingredient of the Aztec floating gardens, the sacred mud, dredged from the bottom of Lake Texcoco. It's not just any mud. This is a silky, mineral-rich silt that has accumulated over centuries of aquatic life, mixed with decomposing plants, human and animal waste, and other organic materials. It creates a soil so fertile that farmers here can produce up to 7 harvests a year. That's right, 7. Even your most diligent houseplant can't compete. You scoop up a handful, letting it ooze between your fingers. The texture is thick and luxurious, almost like a high-end spa treatment. Except this mud doesn't come with cucumber slices or whale music. Instead, you get the gentle sounds of birds singing and the distant creak of a canoe gliding by. The farmers around you work efficiently, hauling up more mud from the lake bed with long-handled tools. They spread it evenly across the surface of the Chinampa, replenishing the nutrients that the previous crops have drained. The process is so rhythmic, so seamless, that you might almost think the land itself is breathing inhale with new mud, exhale with flourishing plants. Historians widely acknowledge the ingenuity of this soil system, but they still argue about its exact origins. Did the Aztecs inherit this technique from earlier Mesoamerican civilizations, like the Teotihuacanos, or did they develop it independently out of sheer necessity? The truth, as usual, probably lies somewhere in between. As you kneel down to inspect the soil more closely, you spot tiny insects scurrying about, beetles, worms, and other decomposers diligently working to break down organic matter. They're part of this micro-ecosystem, a complex and self-sustaining network that keeps the Chinampas productive year after year. The air here is thick with life. The scent of the mud is earthy and strong, mingling with the crisp fragrance of young maize shoots and the occasional whiff of lake algae. Overhead, a flock of ibises wheels lazily in the sky, their long legs trailing behind them as they search for their morning meal. You wander further along the Chinampa, marveling at how sturdy it feels beneath your feet. From a distance, it looks like it should be unstable, maybe even sinking under the weight of all that soil and vegetation. But up close, it's solid, resilient and ancient technology that has stood the test of time far better than, say, your latest smartphone model at the edge of the garden. A woman tends to a patch of beans, her hands moving deftly to pull up weeds and check for pests. She smiles at you but says nothing, focused on her task. Farming here is not a part-time hobby or a pastoral fantasy. It's a way of life, one that requires constant vigilance and care. You watch as she uses a wooden hoe to gently loosen the soil around the base of each plant, allowing air and water to reach the roots. The Chinampa's proximity to the water table means that irrigation is largely handled by nature itself. No need for elaborate aqueducts or irrigation canals. The lake does the work, seeping up through the porous soil to keep the plants hydrated. Nearby, another farmer is adding fresh layers of decomposing vegetation to a different plot, creating what looks like a compost pile but is actually an integral part of the Chinampa's construction. This organic matter will break down over time, adding even more nutrients to the already rich soil. You pause for a moment, realizing just how sustainable this system is. No chemical fertilizers, no reliance on fossil fuels, just mud, plants, and human labor, all working in harmony. It's a far cry from the industrial agriculture of today, and yet it produced enough food to sustain one of the largest cities in the pre-Columbian Americas. You squat down and press your palm flat against the warm soil, closing your eyes and listening to the gentle sounds of the Chinampa waking up, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the splash of a fish jumping in the canal, the distant call of a heron. It's hard not to feel a kind of reverence for this place then. Just as you're about to stand up, you notice something curious. A small pottery shard, half buried in the mud. You pick it up, turning it over in your hand. The surface is etched with faint patterns, worn smooth by centuries of exposure. Was it part of a cooking pot, a ceremonial vessel? Historians still debate the everyday versus sacred uses of such artifacts found in Chinampa soil. Either way, it's a quiet reminder that these gardens were more than just fields. They were places where life unfolded in all its messy, beautiful complexity. You slip the shard back into the earth, covering it gently with a handful of that sacred mud. The sun is climbing higher now, casting golden light across the lake and making the water shimmer like a vast moving mirror. As you walk back to your canoe, your feet squelching softly in the mud, you take one last look at the Chinampa behind. You a patch of floating earth, born from mud and labor, sustained by ingenuity and tradition. And you think to yourself, as the paddle dips once more into the water, not bad for a pile of dirt on a raft. You awaken to the gentle rocking of the canoe, your fingers trailing lazily through the cool water as it glides silently between the Chinampas. The sun is higher now, casting long shadows of maize stalks and bean vines across the narrow canals. Ahead, a farmer stands at the edge of his floating island, leaning casually on a wooden paddle, his face serene as he watches the morning unfold. Today, you decide to shadow him, to follow the slow, deliberate rhythm of a day in the life of an Aztec Chinampa farmer. You step onto the spongy soil, feeling the familiar give beneath your weight, and fall into step behind him as he moves through the rows of crops. The first task is a simple inspection. He walks slowly between the rows of maize, stopping occasionally to examine a leaf or adjust the support of a growing stalk. The plants here are healthy tall, green, and almost humming with life. You run your hand along one of the stalks, marveling at its smooth strength. Each plant is spaced carefully, the arrangement perfected over generations to maximize both light and airflow. The farmer pauses to stretch, then moves to the next plot, where young squash vines are beginning to sprawl across the damp earth. Their large, flat leaves catch the sunlight like little green umbrellas, casting dappled shade on the tender shoots beneath. You crouch down to get a better look and spot a small, bright yellow blossom, a promise of the squash to come. The work here is quiet, methodical, almost meditative. There's no rush, no frantic pace, just the steady rhythm of tending to the land, of ensuring that every plant has what it needs. You watch as the farmer gently pulls a few weeds, his fingers moving expertly through the soil. Occasionally, he hums a simple tune under his breath, a song passed down, perhaps from his parents and theirs before them. You can't help but smile at the thought, an ancient lullaby for the plants. The morning sun grows warmer, and the air fills with the layered scents of earth, water, and vegetation. Somewhere nearby, a duck quacks lazily, probably annoyed that you've disrupted its usual morning routine. Historians generally agree that this agricultural routine was the backbone of Aztec society. Without it, the empire could not have supported the massive urban population of Tenochtitlan, estimated at over 200,000 people at its peak. And yet, despite its critical importance, the daily life of a Chinampa farmer was largely unquiet, repetitive, and, to modern eyes, maybe even a little boring, but there's comfort in the routine. You notice how the farmer knows every inch of his Chinampa, every dip and rise in the soil, every patch where the water seeps up a little more readily. He moves with an ease and familiarity that only comes from years of working the same land, or, in this case, the same floating patch of earth tethered delicately to the lake bed. He pauses to take a long drink from a gourd flask, offering you a sip as well. The water is cool and faintly mineral, a welcome relief from the steadily rising heat. Next, it's time to check the canal walls. You follow him to the edge of the Chinampa, where he crouches and examines the retaining barriers made from woven reeds and wooden stakes. These need regular maintenance. The lake's slow but persistent currents and the seasonal rains can erode the banks if left unchecked. He reinforces a loose section by driving in another stake and weaving a fresh bundle of reeds through the framework. The technique is simple but effective, a testament to the Aztecs' pragmatic approach to engineering. No complicated machinery, no synthetic materials, just nature's own resources, applied with human ingenuity. As you help pass him reeds, your fingers brush against the rough, sun-dried fibers, noticing how they crackle softly in your grasp. You wonder how many generations of farmers have performed this same task, kneeling here, hands in the water, shoring up the walls of their little islands. A dragonfly darts past your head, its iridescent wings catching the light in a sudden flash of emerald and gold. You can't help but follow its path as it weaves through the air, finally settling on a broad squash leaf nearby. The farmer stands and wipes his brow, then gestures for you to follow him to the canoe. It's time to gather supplies from a neighboring Chinampa, daily journey made easier by the intricate web of canals that connects the entire system. As you paddle slowly beside him, you take in the view. Rows upon rows of lush green plots, interspersed with patches of brilliant orange marigolds and the occasional clump of sunflowers, their faces turned eagerly toward the sky. And then, as your canoe rounds a bend, you come upon another farmer, this one ferrying a load of freshly harvested beans and maize toward the market. The two exchange a few words, perhaps a joke or a bit of gossips, hard to tell from this distance, but their laughter carries easily over the water. You realize that, despite the solitude of each Chinampa, this is a deeply interconnected community. The canals aren't just transportation routes. They're the threads that tie together the social fabric of Chinampa life. As you continue your journey, you reflect on how this way of life is both ancient and remarkably sustainable. There's no rush, no clock to punch in, just the steady, unhurried pace of nature, and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring the same tasks, the same quiet routines. And honestly, isn't that kind of comforting? You glance up at the sky, now a bright, cloudless blue, and think about how many farmers have looked up at that same sky, taken the same breath of lake-scented air, and felt the same quiet satisfaction at a day well spent. You wake to the sounds of gentle splashing, the rhythmic dip of paddles in the water as farmers navigate the narrow canals, moving between the lush green plots like silent sentinels of the lake. Today, you're about to learn just how efficient these floating gardens really are, a system so productive it would make even the most modern agronomists jealous. You ease yourself out of the canoe and onto the soft, forgiving surface of a Chinampa. The morning sun warms your shoulders as you watch a farmer harvesting ears of maize with practiced precision. He works quickly but carefully, moving through the rows in a methodical pattern, gathering what appears to be an almost endless supply of corn, beans, squash, and amaranth. You soon realize that this is not an occasional harvest. It's one of many throughout the year. In fact, this system is so remarkably productive that farmers here can coax up to 7 harvests annually from the same piece of land. 7. You pause to do the mental math. While your little balcony herb garden barely produces a handful of wilted basil leaves, these Chinampas are veritable food factories. The secret, of course, lies in the combination of that nutrient-rich lake mud and the constant passive irrigation provided by the surrounding water. Roots never go thirsty here. The lake seeps up gently through the porous soil, ensuring that plants receive a steady, reliable source of moisture without the need for elaborate irrigation systems. It's a kind of symbiotic relationship between land and water that feels both impossibly simple and elegantly complex. You watch as the farmer moves on to tend to a plot of leafy greens, their vibrant colors standing out against the dark, fertile soil. He doesn't seem rushed. There's a rhythm to the work, a flow that syncs perfectly with the slow movement of the water and the gentle rustling of the plants in the breeze. Historians still marvel at the sheer efficiency of this agricultural system. Some argue that it represents one of the most sophisticated examples of pre-modern sustainable farming in the world. Others debate how scalable it was. Could it have supported even larger populations if left undisturbed by conquest? The academic jury remains out, but here, standing amidst these flourishing plots, theory doesn't matter much. What you see is proof. A landscape that feeds not just individuals, but entire communities. A canoe approaches, guided by a young woman balancing baskets overflowing with freshly cut flowers, marigolds, dahlias, and other vibrant blooms destined for the markets of Tenochtitlan or for ritual offerings at the temples. You marvel at the sheer diversity of what grows here. Not just staples like maize and beans, but also medicinal herbs, spices, flowers, and even ornamental plants. The farmer you've been shadowing points to a small patch of chiles growing near the edge of the Chinampa. He picks one and offers it to you with a knowing smile. You hesitate, then take a cautious bite and instantly regret your life choices. The heat explodes in your mouth, causing you to cough and laugh simultaneously. He chuckles quietly and hands you a calabash filled with cool water. You've just learned an important lesson. Aztec farmers knew how to keep things interesting. The biodiversity here is staggering. Unlike the monocultures of industrial agriculture, Chinampas are polycultures, diverse, resilient, and self-sustaining. This variety helps protect the crops from pests and diseases, while ensuring a steady supply of food throughout the year. You kneel down to examine a row of amaranth plants, their tall, feathery plumes swaying gracefully in the breeze. Once a staple of the Aztec diet, amaranth is rich in protein and nutrients, a superfood centuries ahead of its time. You brush your fingers gently along the delicate grains, feeling their softness and marveling at the understated beauty of this ancient crop. Nearby, a group of farmers works together to rotate crops, pulling up spent plants and preparing the soil for the next round of seedlings. Crop rotation is a key component of maintaining soil health here, preventing nutrient depletion and ensuring that the Chinampas remain productive season after season. As you stand and stretch, taking in the endless expanse of green islands and shimmering canals, you can't help but think of how alien this landscape must have seemed to the Spanish conquistadors who first laid eyes on it. A city built in a lake, surrounded by floating farms, an ecological masterpiece that functioned with a precision and grace unmatched by anything in Europe at the time. You glance over your shoulder to see a flock of white egrets lifting off from the far side of the Chinampa, their wings beating slowly as they rise into the clear blue sky. The farmer, too, pauses for a moment to watch them, then wipes his hands on his trousers and returns to work. You follow him to a small compost pile tucked away in a corner of the Chinampa, where decomposing plant material and organic waste are being transformed into future nutrients for the next generation of crops. Nothing here is wasted. Everything serves a purpose in this carefully balanced ecosystem. It strikes you just how timeless all of this feels. The same processes, the same techniques, likely practiced in much the same way for hundreds of years. And yet, despite its antiquity, this system could teach modern agriculture a thing or two about sustainability and efficiency. As the sun reaches its zenith, casting brilliant reflections off the water and bathing the Chinampas in golden light. You take a deep breath of the rich, earthy air and let yourself simply exist in this space for a moment longer. Because here, efficiency isn't about speed or profit margins, it's about balance, harmony, and respect for the land and water that sustain life. You wake to the faint sound of a wooden flute playing in the distance. Its soft, melodic notes weaving effortlessly with the rustling reeds and the gentle lapping of water against the Chinampa's edge. Today, your path takes you beyond the labor and into the sacred side of the Chinampas that isn't always so obvious at first glance. You follow the faint tune through a narrow canal, the canoe gliding smoothly over the calm, glassy water. The air is cool and damp, carrying with it the sense of crushed marigolds and wild mint. As you round a bend, you arrive at a small clearing where a group of farmers has gathered. They're not working today. Instead, they kneel together on woven mats, heads bowed before a simple stone altar decorated with bundles of flowers, ears of maize, and a small clay effigy of Tlaloc, the god of rain. You step onto the soft earth and quietly sit at the edge of the gathering, feeling the reverence of the moment wash over you. The leader of the ceremony, an elder with long, silver-streaked hair tied back neatly, raises a bowl of pulqueya, mildly alcoholic drink made from fermented agave sap, and slowly pours it onto the ground, offering thanks to the earth and water for another successful harvest. It's a small ritual, humble and heartfelt. And you realize that for the farmers of the Chinampas, agriculture was never just a matter of planting and harvesting. It was also about maintaining a spiritual connection with the forces of nature that made such abundance possible. These daily, almost casual offerings were woven seamlessly into their routines, like watering plants or weeding a garden. You look around and notice that nearly every Chinampa you visited has some form of these little shrines, some as simple as a pile of stones, others more elaborate with carved wooden figures and colorful paper banners fluttering in the breeze. Historians still debate the extent to which these rituals permeated every aspect of Chinampa life. Some argue that they were primarily symbolic, while others believe that no act of farming was complete without first acknowledging the gods. Either way, as you sit here in the quiet, listening to the murmured prayers and the soft splash of water, it's clear that the boundary between the sacred and the practical was thin, almost non-existent. The ceremony ends without fanfare, and the farmers rise, some stretching their arms, others adjusting their woven belts. A few laugh quietly among themselves before returning to their canoes to continue with their day's work. You stand too, your knees protesting slightly from kneeling on the soft but uneven mat, and continue exploring. Nearby, you stumble upon a patch of vibrant cempasúchil flowers, the iconic marigolds that the Aztecs revered for their bright color and pungent scent. You pick one carefully, inhaling its rich, spicy aroma. These flowers weren't just decorative. They were essential offerings in ceremonies, especially during festivals honoring the dead. As you walk further along the Chinampa, you notice another small altar tucked between rows of squash and beans. This one features a more weathered effigy, its features worn smooth by years of rain and sun. A faint trail of incense smoke curls upward from a recently burned offering. Mixing with the earthy scent of the soil, it strikes you how these spiritual practices are intimately tied to the land itself. There are no grand temples here, no towering pyramids, just quiet acts of devotion nestled among the crops, as much a part of the landscape as the willows that fringe the canals. The farmer you've been shadowing all this time approaches, and offers you a cup of atole, a warm, thick drink made from ground maize and flavored with cinnamon and cacao. You accept it gratefully, letting the comforting warmth settle in your stomach as you sit together on the edge of the Chinampa. He points to the sky, where clouds are beginning to gather in thick, cottony formations. Rain is coming. The farmers welcome it. Of course, will feed the lake, refresh the plants, and renew the cycle once more. You sip the atole slowly, watching as he lays down a small offering of flowers at the base of a nearby willow. It's not a grand gesture, just a simple moment of gratitude, one that seems perfectly at home in this place where life and nature are so deeply intertwined. For a moment, you reflect on how modern farming so often divorces itself from these kinds of rituals, focusing solely on yield and efficiency, with little thought for the spiritual or symbolic connections to the land. But here, on the Chinampas, farming is as much about harmony as it is about harvest. The rain begins, soft at first, then steadily more insistent, drumming gently on the leaves and sending little rings across the surface of the water. You pull up the hood of your cloak and smile, realizing that you're exactly where you're supposed to be soaked, surrounded by nature, and completely at peace. As you sit in the rain, you glance down at the earth beneath your feet, the same sacred mud you first squelched through days ago, now darkened and enriched by the falling water. And you think about how, even in the simplest act of rain falling on soil, the entire system of the Chinampas is reaffirmed. Water feeding earth, earth feeding life, life giving thanks in return. Not a bad cycle, you think, as you take another sip of atole and watch the rain blur the edges of the world around you into soft, muted greens and greys. You awaken the next morning to a faint, sweet fragrance wafting through the air, something delicate and unexpected amid the usual earthy scents of mud and maize. Following the aroma, you meander down a narrow path, your fingers brushing gently against dew-dampened leaves. As you round a cluster of towering cornstalks, the landscape suddenly bursts into color. Rows upon rows of brilliantly blooming flowers stretch out before you, their petals vivid in the golden morning light. You pause, momentarily stunned. This is not the utilitarian vegetable patch you expected. Instead, it's a veritable garden of marigolds, dahlias, and sunflowers, all nodding gently in the breeze as though sharing a private joke. The air is thick with their perfume, a mixture of spicy citrusy notes that makes you inhale deeply and sigh with something resembling pure contentment. These floral plots are as essential to the Chinampa system as the rows of squash and amaranth you saw earlier. You learn quickly that flowers were not just for decoration here. They served a multitude of purposes, from religious offerings to market commodities, even to medicinal remedies. It's hard to imagine now, but entire fleets of canoes used to set out from these very canals, piled high with blossoms destined for the bustling markets of Tenochtitlan. You spot a young girl kneeling between the rows, carefully selecting the most perfect marigolds to weave into garlands for an upcoming festival. Her fingers move with practiced grace, breaking the stems with just the right amount of pressure. She hums softly as she works, her tune blending seamlessly with the background sounds of bees lazily drifting from flower to flower. As you crouch down to get a closer look at one of the marigolds, its fiery orange petals nearly glowing against the dark soil, you can't help but marvel at the sheer beauty of it all. These flowers are not mere ornamentation. They are vital threads in the cultural and economic fabric of the Aztec world. Historians largely agree that the cultivation of flowers on the Chinampas played a significant role in Aztec society. Not only were they essential in religious ceremonies, those dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, the goddess of beauty and love, but they were also valuable trade goods. However, scholars still debate just how much of this floral economy was driven by market demands versus religious obligation. You wander further through the garden and find another farmer, tending to a patch of medicinal herbs nestled between rows of dahlias. He gestures for you to come closer and plucks a small sprig of ipsosot, a pungent herb used both in cooking and for treating stomach ailments. You rub the leaves between your fingers, releasing their sharp, almost peppery scent, and chuckles softly. Turns out, the ancient Aztecs had their version of Tums nearby. A stand of sunflowers reaches skyward, their golden heads following the arc of the sun. You watch as a hummingbird darts in and out among the blossoms, its iridescent feathers catching flashes of green and blue as it hovers with miraculous precision. It's hard not to feel a little envious of the bird's effortless grace compared to your slightly awkward footing on the soft, spongy earth. You pause at the edge of the Chinampa, where a canoe is being loaded with bundles of cut flowers wrapped carefully in woven mats. The farmer explains, with a quiet pride, that these will be taken to the great Tlatelolco market, where merchants and priests will haggle over their price, their quality assessed with the same scrutiny given to the finest maize or cacao beans. You imagine the scene, a bustling market, rows upon rows of vibrant flowers, their colors clashing and complementing, their scents mingling in a dizzying olfactory symphony. All of it starting here, on these humble, floating gardens. The economic importance of these flowers is clear, but as you stand here, surrounded by their riotous beauty, you sense there's something more, something almost defiant in their very presence. Amid the practical demands of feeding an empire, the Aztecs still made space for beauty, for color, for fragrance. In a world often obsessed with efficiency, they chose to cultivate joy alongside sustenance. The farmer hands you a small bouquet, a cluster of marigolds and dahlias, and you accept it gratefully, tucking it behind your ear as you continue your exploration. The petals brush softly against your cheek, their scent following you like a gentle, invisible tether to this place. As you walk, you spot yet another small shrine tucked discreetly between the flower beds, a simple arrangement of stones encircling a clay figurine adorned with fresh blooms. It's another quiet reminder that here, in the Chinampas, beauty, spirituality, and practicality are inextricably linked. You sit for a moment on a flat stone near the water's edge, watching as a family paddles by in a canoe overflowing with sunflowers. The children laugh as they pluck petals and toss them into the water, where they float serenely away, their reflections dancing on the shimmering surface. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, letting the heady mixture of earth, water, and blossoms envelop you completely. This, you realize, is the heart of the Chinampas, not just a system of farming, but a celebration of life in all its colorful, fragrant, and interconnected forms. And as you sit there, the bouquet still tucked behind your ear, you think, maybe every garden should float. You awaken to an unfamiliar tension in the airless stillness that seems out of place amid the usual symphony of bird calls and rustling reeds. As you push your canoe gently through the narrow canal, you notice that the farmers are not hunched over their usual work today. Instead, they stand watchful at the edges of their chinampas, their eyes scanning the shimmering surface of the lake. Something's different. You follow their gaze toward the distance, where faint shapes, barely more than smudges on the horizon, are moving steadily across the water. Canoes, dozens of them, paddling in formation, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. You pull your own canoe to the side of a Chinampa and step cautiously onto the soft earth, seeking refuge beneath the protective branches of a willow tree. A farmer standing nearby gives you a curt nod, then returns his attention to the approaching canoes. It's not a market day. These are not merchants or flower sellers. As you glance around, you begin to realize that this patchwork of floating gardens, this marvel of agriculture, has a secret life. It is also a fortress. The Chinampas of Tenochtitlan were not just designed for farming, they were strategic elements in the city's defense. The maze of canals and floating islands created a natural barrier that was difficult for outsiders to navigate. The soft mud banks could swallow the footing of an unwary soldier, and the tall maize stalks could easily hide a row of defenders, waiting silently with otlet spear throwers at the ready. Historians continue to debate how much of the Chinampa layout was consciously designed for defense versus being an unintended but fortuitous side effect of their agricultural system. But standing here now, your heart beating quietly in your chest, you're inclined to believe that the defensive capabilities were no accident. A group of men emerges from a small shelter on the Chinampa, their hands deftly preparing fishing nets. For fish today, but for creating temporary barriers across the canal. You watch as they stretch the nets across the waterway, securing them between wooden stakes and bundles of reeds. The simple trap will slow down or even entangle any canoes attempting to force their way through. Your mind races, imagining what it would be like to attack this place threading through unfamiliar canals, your boat snagging on hidden barriers, while unseen defenders launch projectiles from the dense green walls. The very landscape would seem to conspire against you. A sudden splash pulls your attention back to the present. One of the defenders has slipped off the edge of the Chinampa into the water, quickly pulling himself out with an embarrassed grin. The others chuckle softly, the tension breaking for just a moment. You can't help but smile too, realizing that even in moments of potential danger, human nature finds ways to be, well, human. The approaching canoes draw closer, their forms becoming clearer. But instead of war cries or flashing weapons, you hear laughter raucous and familiar. It's just another group of farmers returning from a neighboring settlement, their boats loaded with reeds and baskets of fish. The men standing guard relax, exchanging friendly insults with the newcomers as the tension drains from the air like water from a leaky canoe. You breathe a sigh of relief. But the moment has revealed something important to you. The Chinampas are not just a tranquil, pastoral landscape. They are adaptable, multifunctional spaces that have served the Aztecs, not only in feeding their empire, but also in protecting it. The farmer standing next to you explains, with a wry smile, how during times of actual conflict, the Chinampas could be flooded intentionally, their supports loosened to create unstable, shifting barriers that would make enemy advances nearly impossible. It was a defense strategy as much rooted in knowledge of the land as it was in clever engineering. You glance around now with new eyes, seeing not just rows of maize and sunflowers, but also layers of tactical advantage. The winding canals, the narrow passages, the thick stands of willow trezoll, parts of a living, breathing fortification. As you paddle back through the canals later that day, you reflect on how the Chinampas, so often romanticized as serene gardens floating on placid waters, also held within them the capacity for resistance and resilience. They are a testament to the Aztecs' understanding that survival requires not only the ability to cultivate food, but also the ability to defend what you've built. And just as you turn a corner, passing beneath a low-hanging branch, you spot a small carving etched into the bark, a stylized representation of a warrior's face, complete with headdress and stern eyes. A quiet reminder that even here, among the flowers and crops, vigilance is never far from hand. You smile, adjusting your paddle as the water splashes gently against the sides of your canoe. The sun is beginning to set, casting long shadows across the Chinampas, the landscape once again returning to its familiar, deceptive calm. You awaken to the creak of a heavily laden canoe sliding past your own, its bow barely visible above a mound of leafy greens and bundles of bright orange marigolds. Today, you're venturing into the heart of one of the most vibrant aspects of Chinampa life, the floating markets. Pushing away from the shore, you dip your paddle into the smooth water and let the current guide you along one of the main trading routes. The canal is bustling with activity now, the usual serenity replaced by the gentle chaos of commerce. Farmers in wide-brimmed hats steer their canoes with practiced ease, navigating the maze of water with the confidence of people who know every current, every submerged route. You pass a canoe stacked precariously with baskets of chiles, the red and green peppers spilling slightly over the edge with every ripple of water. The vendor paddling it gives you a quick nod, then calls out to another trader further down the canal, their voices carrying easily over the still surface. It's astonishing to think that these floating markets supplied not just local farmers, but the entire city of Tenochtitlan, one of the largest urban centers in the world at its peak. Historians estimate that tens of thousands of people thronged the great Tlatelolco market each day, and much of what they purchased began here. On the Chinampas. You follow the sound of voices and the rhythmic splash of paddles until you arrive at a wider section of the canal where a cluster of canoes has temporarily come together, creating an impromptu floating market right here on the water. There are no stalls, no awnings, just boats tied side by side, their contents laid bare for all to see. You ease your canoe alongside one packed with avocados, each fruit carefully wrapped in dried corn husks to prevent bruising. The vendor smiles and offers you a sample, slicing the fruit expertly with a blade of obsidian. You taste it creamy, rich, subtly nutty and realize that, once again, the Chinampas have outdone themselves. You watch as nearby traders barter quietly their negotiations, punctuated by laughter and the occasional exaggerated gesture. One woman trades a basket of tomatoes for a bundle of medicinal herbs. Another exchanges marigolds for a slab of dried fish. There's a fluidity to it all, an easy rhythm, as natural as the flow of water beneath their boats. Historians have long noted how integral these markets were to the functioning of Aztec society, not just economically, but socially. Yet they continue to debate the extent to which market regulation influenced everyday transactions. Some argue that officials tightly controlled trade to prevent disputes, while others suggest that much of this smaller-scale commerce was left to the traders themselves, governed more by mutual trust than law. As you drift among the boats, you notice that the traders aren't just selling produce. There are woven mats, clay pots, wooden tools, even small clay figurines of deities, perhaps intended as offerings or household altars. The variety is dizzying, and you marvel at how this network of Chinampas doesn't just grow food, but also supports artisans, healers, and spiritual practitioners. You pull up alongside a canoe piled high with cempasúchil, flowers destined for an upcoming festival. The vendor, an elderly man with weathered hands and a gap-toothed grin, plucks one of the blooms and hands it to you with a wink. You accept it, tucking it behind your ear once more, amused by how quickly this has become your default Chinampa accessory. The sun climbs higher, casting glistening reflections across the water. As more and more canoes converge on the canal, the chatter grows louder, blending with the splash of paddles and the occasional squawk of a heron taking flight from a nearby reed bed. You pause to consider how remarkable this system is, not only for its efficiency, but for its sustainability. No roads to pave, no carts to push, no animals to burden. Just human power, canoes, and water. It's almost absurdly elegant. You realize too that the floating market is more than a place of exchange. It's a place of connection, where news, gossip, and family stories flow as freely as the goods, too. Young boys paddle by, their canoe overloaded with wild greens, giggling as they narrowly avoid colliding with your own. Their mother scolds them affectionately from another boat, but you can tell she's smiling to Dot further down the canal. A group of women are trading textiles, beautifully woven cloaks, dyed in shades of deep indigo and burnt sienna. You can't help but reach out and trail your fingers across one of the fabrics, appreciating its rough texture and subtle patterns. You reflect on how these canals, these Chinampas, and these markets created not only an agricultural system, but a cultural one, a network of relationships, traditions, and livelihoods that thrived for centuries. As the sun reaches its zenith, many of the traders begin to break apart from the floating cluster, paddling toward Tenochtitlan or back to their home. You, too, steer your canoe away, but not before taking one last look at the boats bobbing gently in the water, their goods glinting in the afternoon light. You paddle slowly, feeling the weight of history settle gently around your shoulders, like the faint scent of marigolds that still clings to you. And as you round a bend in the canal, the floating market disappears behind a curtain of reeds, leaving only the soft echoes of laughter and paddles fading into the warm, sunlit air. You wake to the sounds of soft clucking and the occasional contented quack, and as you peer through the morning mist, you realize that today you won't just be sharing space with farmers and flowers. Instead, you'll be meeting some of the lesser-known residents of the Chinampos, the animals, stepping carefully from your canoe onto the damp, forgiving earth of yet another floating garden. You are immediately greeted by a pair of ducks waddling past, their webbed feet making comical, slapping sounds against the mud. One stops, tilts its head at you as if to judge your outfit choices, then promptly dives into a nearby canal with a splash that sends tiny droplets dancing into the air. You glance around and notice more animals mingling comfortably with the plant. Life, a dog, short-haired and sleek, lounges lazily in the shade of a squash vine, barely lifting an ear as you pass by. Nearby, a group of turkeys pecks methodically at the ground, their iridescent feathers shimmering in hues of bronze and emerald. You hadn't realized that the Chinampas weren't just fields, they were entire ecosystems. These floating farms supported not only plants, but also a range of domesticated animals that provided meat, eggs, and companionship for the farmers and their families. Historians agree that dogs, particularly the native Xoloitzcuintli and turkeys, played essential roles in Aztec daily life. Yet there's still debate about the scale of animal husbandry on the Chinampas. Were these animals raised systematically for food, or did they live more symbiotically, coexisting with their human caretakers in a shared landscape? As you kneel by the edge of the canal, a turtle emerges slowly from the water, its shell slick and dark from years of navigating the muddy banks. It stares at you for a moment before slipping silently back beneath the surface, leaving only a small trail of ripples behind. The farmer you've been shadowing approaches, carrying a woven basket filled with what looked like duck eggs. He explains, with a quiet pride, how the ducks here are not only a food source, but also help control pests by feeding on insects that might otherwise damage the crops. You nod, impressed by the natural pest control, no pesticides required. Just a few hungry ducks going about their business. He gestures for you to follow him further into the Chinampa, where he points out a small shelter made from reeds and palm fronds. Inside, a litter of hairless Zoloid squintly puppies squirm and yawn, their warm, smooth bodies piled in a sleepy tangle. One lifts its head and stares at you with half-closed eyes, its tongue lolling lazily from its mouth in a perfect canine impression of "don't even think about waking me up." You chuckle softly, sitting down next to the shelter to watch them. For a moment longer, the sun breaks through the morning haze, casting long beams of golden light across the Chinampa and illuminating the gentle rise and fall of the puppies. Breathing, a heron glides silently overhead, its long wings slicing cleanly through the air as it heads toward an open stretch of canal in search of breakfast. The farmer nods toward the bird, explaining that herons, egrets, and other waterfowl are frequent visitors here, drawn by the abundance of fish and amphibians, thriving in the nutrient-rich waters around the Chinampas. You realize that the farmers here aren't just cultivating plants, they're managing an entire delicate ecosystem, one where flora and fauna interact in subtle and harmonious ways. The animals provide food, assist in pest control, and even fertilize the soil with their waste. It's a closed-loop system, remarkably efficient, and eerily prescient of modern permaculture techniques. You help the farmer gather feed for the turkeys, scattering it across a cleared patch of earth and watching as they strut over, pecking enthusiastically at the offering. One particularly bold turkey decides to investigate your shoe, giving it a few curious pecks before losing interest and returning to the feed nearby. A boy no older than 10 paddles a small canoe between the Chinampas, his dog perched proudly at the bow, nose raised to catch every new scent. The boy waves as he passes, his laughter carrying easily over the still water. You wave back, struck once again by how life here flows so seamlessly between land and water, human and animal. Historians have long debated the extent to which Aztec society integrated animal husbandry into their agricultural practices. But here, in the quiet reality of a working Chinampa, it feels less like a practice and more like a lifestyle, natural extension of living closely with the land. You sit, back against the base of a willow tree, its branches trailing lazily in the water, and close your eyes for a moment. The sounds of animal life, a rooster crowing in the distance, the faint splash of a fish, the rhythmic paddling of a canoe blend into a soothing, organic soundtrack. You think about how modern farms, with their sterile divisions in industrial scale, often strip away this interconnectedness. But here, on the Chinampas, every living thing seems to have its place and purpose. From the duck preening itself on the canal's edge to the turtle now sunning itself on a half-submerged log, as the sun climbs higher in the sky, warming the earth beneath you. You take one last look around the turkeys, the dog, the ducks gliding effortlessly across the water, and you smile. Because in this floating world, life isn't confined to rows and fences. It's everywhere, moving, breathing, and coexisting in a balance that feels as ancient as the lake itself. You wake to the subtle rustle of leaves and the occasional frustrated squawk of a bird, the kind of sounds that signal something slightly out of balance in this usually harmonious place. As you step onto the Chinampa, the farmer you've been. Shadowing greets you with a weary nod, his gaze already fixed on a patch of maize that looks all less than ideal. The leaves are chewed through, ragged and frayed at the edges. You crouch down, running your fingers along the damage, and spot the culprits. Small, plump caterpillars inching their way lazily from stalk to stalk, oblivious to the silent curses being hurled their way by the humans. Yes, even in this Neratopian system, problems arise. Pests, disease, the occasional invasive plant no agricultural system is immune. But what's fascinating here is how these challenges are met, not with chemicals or heavy machinery, but with simple, time-tested methods passed down through generations. You follow the farmer as he heads toward a makeshift shed and returns with a bundle of what looks like feathers tied to a stick. He walks to the edge of the Chinampa and plants the stick firmly into the soil near the troubled crops. It's a scarecrow, more like a scare stick, but effective nonetheless. The fluttering feathers catch the breeze, creating sudden movements that, ideally, will keep some of the more skittish birds at bay. You laugh quietly to yourself, realizing that ancient pest control techniques aren't all that different from what your grandparents might have used. Simple, low-tech, and oddly charming. The farmer then points out another subtle defense. Clay pots, half buried at the base of certain plants. These, he explains, are traps for insects. Once lured inside by the promise of shade or moisture, the bugs find it difficult to escape, reducing their numbers naturally over time. Historians still marvel at the ingenuity of these low-impact techniques, though they debate their overall effectiveness in large-scale pest management. Some argue that these methods, while clever, could only handle so much, and that crop loss due to pests was an accepted part of Chinampa farming. Others suggest that the biodiversity of the system itself, multiple crops, interspersed herbs, the presence of natural predators acted as a form of built-in pest control. As you walk alongside the farmer, he stoops to pluck a weed that has managed to wedge itself between two healthy squash plants. He explains how constant vigilance is necessary, not just against insects and birds, but also against the lake itself. The canals can rise unexpectedly, flooding parts of the Chinampa, if not carefully managed. He gestures to a series of small, reed-woven barriers at the Chinampa's edge, simple levees that can be adjusted to control water flow. You watch as he lifts a section, letting a controlled rush of water pass through before replacing it just as quickly. It's like opening a valve, but without the stainless steel and hydraulic pressure of modern infrastructure. The rain from the previous night has left parts of the Chinampa waterlogged, and the farmer shows you how he uses shallow trenches to direct excess water away from delicate crops, ensuring they don't drown in the very system designed to nourish them. You pause, to marvel once again at the balance required to maintain these floating farms. It's a constant negotiation between nature and human effort, anticipating what the lake might do next. Adjusting, adapting. Nearby, a small flock of ducks waddles through the rows of amaranth, occasionally stopping to peck at the insects scurrying among the plants. The farmer chuckles, calling them his little assistants. You grin, realizing that even the animals play a role in managing the health of these plots. And then, as you bend to inspect a row of beans, you spot something unexpected. A cluster of mushrooms, pale and delicate, pushing up through the moist soil. The farmer warns you off with a shake of his head. Not all the gifts of the Chinampa are welcome, he explains. Some fungi are dangerous if not carefully identified. You nod, stepping back respectfully, reminded that even in this paradise of productivity, there are hazards hidden in plain sight. Later, as you sit at the edge of the canal, your toes trailing in the cool water, you reflect on how much labor and attention it takes to keep these Chinampas thriving. It's not just about planting and harvesting, but about responding to pests, to water levels, to weeds, to shifts in the weather. Historians often romanticize the Chinampa system, lauding its sustainability and elegancy, rightfully so. But they also acknowledge that it demanded constant, unrelenting work. A lazy farmer here would soon find his plot overrun with weeds, his crops decimated by pests, his floating island slowly eroding into the lake. You glance over at the farmer, now reinforcing another reed barrier with calm efficiency, his hands moving as though guided by muscle memory more than conscious thought. It strikes you that farming here is less about battling nature and more about dancing with it, sometimes leading, sometimes following, but always moving in tandem as the sun dips lower in the sky, casting a warm amber glow across the canals. You gather your things and prepare to move on, but not before taking one last look at the carefully arranged feathers, the strategically placed clay pots, and the quiet determination of the farmer who keeps this small piece of floating earth not just alive, but flourishing. Because in the world of the Chinampas, survival isn't about domination, it's about respect, adaptation, and the endless patience to meet every new challenge with a steady hand and a clear mind. You rise with the first blush of dawn, the sky streaked with soft pinks and oranges as mist curls lazily above the water's surface. Today, as you push your canoe slowly through the tranquil canals, you notice something different. Two older farmers standing at the junction of two their hands gesturing animatedly as they converse in low, steady tones. You pull closer, curiosity piqued, and soon realize that they're not debating crop yields or the latest market prices, but something far more complex, the origins of the Chinampas themselves. You ease your canoe to the shore and step quietly onto the soft, muddy ground, taking a seat nearby to listen. The first farmer, leaning heavily on his paddle like a staff, insists that the Chinampas were a gift from the gods, taught to the ancestors by spirits of the lake who revealed how to tame the waters and feed the people. The other shakes his head, chuckling softly, and claims that the system evolved from the practical need of early settlers, long before the Mexico arrived, who experimented with small floating plots and gradually perfected the technique over generations. You can't help but smile as the debate continues, good-natured but passionate. It turns out that even among those who spend their lives tending the Chinampas, their exact origins remain a subject of discussion, a living example of how history can be both fact and legend. Historians, too, are divided. Some suggest that the Chinampa system originated with earlier Mesoamerican civilizations such as the Aztecs, who inhabited this region long before the rise of the Aztec Empire. Archaeological evidence points to ancient constructions along the lake shores, predating the Mexica by centuries, perhaps even millennia. Others argue that while earlier cultures may have experimented with similar techniques, it was the Aztecs through sheer necessity and ingenuity who refined and expanded the system into the vast, efficient network that supported Tenochtitlan's enormous population. You run your hand through the thick reeds growing at the edge of the Chinampa, marveling at how something so simple could give rise to such complexity. Was it a singular invention, a slow evolution, a divine gift whispered through water and earth? The farmers continue their conversation, now veering into tales of their grandfathers' grandfathers, who spoke of the ancient days when the first Chinampas were just narrow rafts of reeds, tethered loosely to the shore, easily pulled away by a strong wind. Over time, with trial and error, they learned to anchor the floating plots with willow trees, whose roots dug deep into the lake bed and transformed impermanent rafts into permanent islands. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining those early farmers waist deep in the shallow waters, driving wooden stakes into the silty bottom, weaving branches, layering mud daub without, knowing that their humble experiment would one day sustain an empire. The farmer with the staff insists, once again, that it must have been the gods. Who else could have taught humans to coax such abundance from water? The other shrugs, grinning, and says, perhaps, but it isn't necessity, its own kind of god. You chuckle quietly to yourself, appreciating the poetic symmetry of that thought. Nearby, a young girl sits cross-legged by the water, weaving reeds into tight bundles for future repairs to the Chinampas' edges. She listens to the two elders with a bemused expression, as though she's heard this debate many times before. And perhaps she has. Here, knowledge isn't just passed down through formal instruction, it's embedded in stories, in arguments, in quiet observations as children watch their elders tend the land. You look around and realize that every detail of this landscape of carefully placed stake, every flowering marigold, every leaning willow holds within it the accumulated wisdom of countless generations, each adding their own layer to the story. Historians may never agree fully on where the Chinampas began, but here, standing amid the living system itself, you realize that maybe the question isn't about pinpointing a singular origin, but about recognizing the remarkable continuity of human ingenuity. Whether whispered by gods or crafted by calloused hands, the result is the same: a sustainable, harmonious relationship with nature, thriving quietly for centuries. One of the farmers notices you sitting nearby and waves you over. He offers you a small earthen cup filled with a mildly sweet drink made from fermented maize. You take a sip, letting the earthy flavor settle on your tongue as the debate continues around you, winding through history, myth, and memory as the sun climbs higher, warming the soft, spongy earth beneath your feet. The two elders finally shake hands, their discussion ending not in victory or concession, but in the shared understanding that some questions are meant to linger, unanswered and eternal. You step back onto your canoe and push away from the shore, leaving them to their conversation, their laughter drifting across the water like the low call of a heron in the distance. And as you paddle slowly through the shimmering canal, you reflect on how even the most ordinary landscapes are layered with mysteries, debates, and stories that refuse to be pinned down by certainty, because, after all, some things, like the Chinampas themselves, are meant to float. You wake to a somber quiet, the kind that feels heavier than mere morning mist. The air is still, save for the distant call of a lone heron and the faint drip of water from the reeds along the Chinampas' edge. As you push your canoe through the silvery canal, the Chinampas stretch before you as they always have, but today they feel different. You stop at the edge of an overgrown plot, where the once orderly rows of maize have long since collapsed into tangled weeds, their stalks bleached by years of neglect. Willow trees lean precariously over the water, their roots exposed and grasping, as if trying to hold on to the past. You step onto the spongy soil, which sinks slightly under your weight, and wander slowly through the remnants of what was once a thriving, carefully tended floating garden. This is not just an abandoned plot. It is a remnant of a system in decline after the Spanish conquest of Tenochtitlan in Iwo The Chinampas that had sustained an empire began to fall into disrepair. You walk among the silent ruins, imagining how quickly things must have changed, how the vibrant fields you explored just days ago, teeming with crops and life, were left to wither under the weight of colonial disruption. Historians widely agree that the Spanish conquest disrupted not only the political and religious structures of the Aztec Empire, but also its agricultural lifelines. Many Chinampas were abandoned as indigenous farmers were displaced, their labor redirected or suppressed. Yet scholars continue to debate how deliberate this abandonment was, whether it was a calculated dismantling of the system, or simply a tragic byproduct of conquest and disease. You kneel to pick up a fragment of pottery, half buried in the soil. It's worn smooth by time, its decorative patterns faded almost beyond recognition. You wonder who last held it: a farmer, a child gathering flowers, a trader preparing for the market. The questions hang in the air, unanswered, like so many. Others left behind by history's sweeping hand. Around you, the lake's water encroaches, slowly reclaiming the land. The delicate balance that once kept the Chinampas afloat mud replenished, barriers reinforced, water levels managed has been broken. Without constant care, the boundaries blur. Soil slips into water, and water into soil, until all that remains is this quiet, melancholy fusion. You pause at the base of a massive willow, its roots gnarled and twisted into the shape of a question. Mark and lean against its trunk. The bark is rough beneath your fingers, but the tree stands resolute, a living testament to resilience amid collapse. Nearby, a small flock of ducks paddles lazily through a half-flooded canal, oblivious to the human absence. Nature, it seems, is adapting, filling in the gaps left behind by centuries of human retreat. You push further into the overgrowth, noticing occasional signs of life: wild squash vines that have gone feral, their bright orange flowers blooming defiantly amid the decay. A heron stands motionless at the water's edge, its piercing gaze fixed on a potential meal. Life, even in abandonment, persists. You stop at a low mound of earth, barely protruding from the water's surface, realizing with a pang that it was once a carefully constructed Chinampa. Now it's little more than a muddy island, its wooden supports long since rotted away. Historians note that some Chinampas were intentionally dismantled as new colonial structures were imposed, while others simply decayed without the careful stewardship that had sustained them for centuries. You think about the farmers you've met, their quiet rituals, their deep knowledge of the lake and the land, and how much was lost in so short a time, and yet, even in this quiet ruin, there are echoes of the past. You find the faint outline of a former canal, now choked with reeds, its once clear passage obscured but not entirely erased. A trail of animal tracks crosses the soft mud, evidence of creatures still navigating this altered landscape. You sit on a half-submerged log and close your eyes, listening to the sounds that remain: the ripple of water, the rustle of leaves, the occasional bird call, and you realize that the Chinampas are not gone, not entirely. They have shifted, transformed, perhaps diminished in scale, yes, but not erased. As you paddle slowly away from the abandoned plot, the water carries you past newer Chinampas, smaller, fewer, but still alive with the hum of bees and the soft swish of paddle blades. The decline was not absolute. In places, the tradition endured, passed quietly from one generation to the next, refusing to vanish entirely. You reflect on how human systems rise and fall, often leaving behind ruins that speak in whispers to those who care to listen. The are no different reminders of what once was, and perhaps what could be again. Because even in decay, there is memory. And sometimes, memory is all that's needed to plant the seed of revival. As your canoe glides silently past the last vestiges of the abandoned Chinampa, you take one final look over your shoulder, the silhouette of the leaning willow dissolving into the morning mist, and you paddle on. You wake to the sound of music, not the ethereal flutes or whispered songs of farmers you've grown used to, but something far more modern, the distant thump of a speaker, the laughter of families, the unmistakable sound of an engine humming quietly across the water. You sit up in your canoe and realize you've drifted far from the ancient Chinampas. You've come to know. The landscape still looks familiar. The crisscrossing canals, the weeping willows, the floating islands, but something is undeniably different here. You've arrived at XOCHIMILCO. As you steer your canoe toward the shore, the scene unfolds like a surreal merging of past and present. Brightly painted Trajanaris large, flat-bottomed boats drift by, their arches adorned with the names of families, lovers, and birthday celebrants in vibrant, sometimes garish colors. A group of musicians stands on one boat, their trumpets gleaming in the midday sun, belting out mariachi tunes as a family cheers and claps from another vessel nearby. You pull your canoe up alongside a quiet dock and step onto one of the Chinampas that has managed, somehow, to survive the centuries. It looks both ancient and curated. Rows of vegetables, flowering plants, and herbs growing in orderly patches, with informational plaques placed at intervals for the benefit of passing tourists. A man greets you warmly, his straw hat tilted back on his head, and invites you to walk with him. He explains that his family has been tending this Chinampa for generations, though now, much of their livelihood depends on visitors like you, rather than solely on the crops they cultivate. You wander together through the garden, noting how carefully maintained it is. Squash vines curl gracefully around their supports. Marigolds bloom in bursts of orange and yellow, and, in the corner, a small plot of maize stands tall against the backdrop of the distant city skyline. This, you realize, is the modern Chinampa. Part farm, part living museum, part tourist attraction. Historians and ecologists often debate the value of this modern iteration. Some argue that Exocamilco's Chinampas have been reduced to little more than a theme park, their agricultural roots severed in favor of commercial entertainment. Others contend that this adaptation is a form of survival and evolution of tradition that ensures the Chinampas remain part of the cultural consciousness, even if their role has changed. As you stand beneath a willow tree, watching a group of tourists snap photos in front of a marigold patch, you can't help but feel the weight of both arguments. The essence of the Chinampa endures the land, the water, the crops, but its context has shifted dramatically. Your guide gestures toward a nearby canal, where another Trajanera floats by, piled high with crates of beer, snacks, and a sound system blasting cumbia into the warm air. He chuckles and shrugs, acknowledging that while the atmosphere may be louder than it once was, the water still nourishes the soil, and the soil still gives life. He leads you to a small shaded area where young seedlings are being cultivated. Here, away from the raucous music and laughter, the quiet returns. The delicate plants are being prepared for transplantation into the main gardener, reminder that beneath the spectacle, the ancient practice continues. Stubborn and steadfast, you kneel beside one of the seed trays, running your fingers through the dark, familiar mud. and realize it's the same sacred material you encountered days ago. The nutrient-rich silt dredged from the lake, unchanged after centuries. Nearby, a group of schoolchildren sits cross-legged, listening attentively as a woman explains the history of the Chinampas, using simple words and gestures to convey the complexity of this system to eager young minds. You smile, recognizing that, while the audience has changed, the story remains the same. Your guide offers you a seat beneath the shade of a jacaranda tree, its purple blossoms just beginning to scatter across the ground like pieces of soft confetti. He pours you a cup of chilled agua de Jamaica and asks where you're from, how you found your way here. You laugh, realizing you're not entirely sure anymore. It feels like you've been floating through time. As you sip the tart, floral drink, you glance out over the water and watch another Trajanera pass by, this one quieter, carrying an elderly couple and a small dog napping contentedly at their feet. You think about the farmers who once navigated these canals with their canoes loaded with marigolds, maize, and amaranth, bound for the markets of Tenochtitlan and now, centuries later, these same waters carry party boats, school groups, and curious travelers like yourself. Is it preservation? Is it transformation? Historians and locals continue to debate, but as you sit here, watching the afternoon sun filter through the willow leaves, you realize that what matters most is that the Chinampas endure. Adapted, yes. Altered, certainly. But still here, still. Floating, you rise, thank your guide, and push your canoe gently back into the canal. As you paddle slowly away from Xochimilco, the sounds of music, laughter, and splashing water fade behind you, replaced once again by the soft rustle of reeds and the familiar creak of your paddle. And you smile, knowing that the story of the Chinampas is not one of simple preservation or loss, but of resilience always shifting, always finding new ways to stay afloat. You wake in the soft glow of early evening, as the sun drifts lazily toward the horizon, casting the entire Chinampa landscape in hues of amber, rose, and lavender. The air is cooler now, tinged with the earthy scent of damp soil and the faint, sweet fragrance of night-blooming flowers. Today, you're not here to work, to observe, or even to learn, but simply to reflect. You push your canoe gently along the canal, letting the current carry you without effort or intention. The water is perfectly still, save for the ripples your paddle leaves behind, spreading in widening circles that disappear quietly into the mirrored surface. You drift past familiar sights, the rows of maize standing tall and proud, the willows, their branches kissing the water, the ducks now settling into their nests, their heads tucked beneath their wings. Everything moves slower at this hour, even the dragonflies, whose usual darting flights have been replaced by long, lazy arcs. Over the calm water, you pull the canoe alongside a small, quiet Chinampa and step onto the soft, springy earth. The plants here have already settled in for the night, their leaves folding delicately, their blossoms closing as if in response to the falling light. You find a spot at the edge of the plot and sit cross-legged, your hands resting gently on your knees, your breath slowing naturally to match the pace of the landscape around you. Here, in this quiet corner of the lake, the legacy of the Chinampas feels more profound than ever, not as an agricultural system, or a defensive structure, or even a tourist attraction, but simply as a living testament to human patience, creativity, and harmony with nature. You close your eyes and listen. The faint call of a heron in the distance, the slow creak of a canoe's wooden hull against a dock, the soft sigh of wind weaving through reeds and willow branches. You open your eyes to see the sun dipping below the horizon, its light stretching long fingers across the water, turning the entire lake into a sheet of liquid gold. You take a slow, deep breath, feeling the cool air fill your lungs, and exhale, releasing the last bits of tension you didn't even realize you were holding. You think about the farmers who woke before dawn to tend these floating gardens, who knew every dip and rise of the soil, every subtle change in the water level, every shift in the seasons. You think about the generations that came after, adapting the Chinampas to new needs, new challenges, refusing to let them vanish. Historians may debate the precise origins of the Chinampas, their true inventors, their spiritual significance, but here, in this moment, none of that matters. What matters is the quiet beauty of this place, the fact that it endures, even after centuries of upheaval. You glance down at the water, now a perfect reflection of the twilight sky, and catch your own face mirrored back, softened by the fading light. You smile, realizing that you, too, are now part of this story, an observer carried by curiosity, by the simple human desire to understand how others have lived, created, and survived, as the last of the sun's rays slip behind the distant mountains. You rise slowly, stretch your arms toward the darkening sky, and step gently back into your canoe. You push away from the Chinampa, your paddle barely disturbing the water as you glide quietly through the fading light. The silhouettes of willows standing sentinel on either side of the canal. The stars begin to appear, one by one, shimmering faintly above the lake like tiny promises of continuity and endurance, and you paddle on, disappearing into the night. Asterisk, asterisk, and now, as your journey through the floating gardens of the Aztecs comes to an end, allow yourself to settle even deeper into comfort. Let your breath slow to match the gentle rhythm of the water that carried you through this timeless landscape. Picture the still lake at dusk, the air cool and fragrant with wildflowers and earth, the last echoes of birdsong fading into the hush of evening. Feel the soft weight of the warm night air around you, the steady embrace of calm and quiet. The Chinampas float on, as they always have, their roots deep in history, their leaves reaching toward whatever tomorrow brings. And you, safe and at peace, float with them in this shared space of memory and presence. Let your thoughts drift like the mist curling over the water, light and free as your body sinks further into rest. You are here, in this quiet, timeless place, and all is well. Sweet dreams.